I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome to today's mini episode of The Most Haunted City on Earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And again, we have Eenie with us. Yes, you can't get enough of her, I know. So Eenie, for those of them who have not listened, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Eenie Edenfield, or Eenie. I moved to Savannah in 2010 from the Florida Panhandle. I worked in news for a really long time, left there in 2020, started sharing ghost stories on TikTok. That blew up, and once things opened up, people started asking for in-person tours, so I started my own ghost and history tour company, Eenie Edenfield Tours.
There you go. Last time we had Eenie here, we had discussed in our Parajunkie exclusive, I believe is where this came up, but Eenie and I obviously are both from Florida, so we were like, Florida's really haunted. Let's talk about Florida ghosts, because I feel like we tend to stick in Georgia up into like Appalachia area, even trickling into, the northeast sort of region and things like that, but we never really dive into Florida. So here we are with a mini episode on Florida ghosts. Florida is a genuinely haunted place in pretty much every area. It's a massive landscape, but it's built on top of a thick layer of limestone, which is really good for paranormal activity. It's also home to one of the most spiritual communities in the entire United States. They literally claim themselves as that. What's it called? Like
Cassadaga.
Yeah, Cassadaga. Yeah. And so really interesting small town. I have not been there yet. I would love to go there one day.
I went there last year. Yeah, last year.
Yeah. So how was it? Like
it was really nice. Like it's one of those places where you can feel the energy in the air. And I think it also kind of depends on what kind of energy you put out is what kind of energy you're going to get. Because some people go there and describe it feeling very heavy and feel like, they're being watched and everything. But a lot of other people are like, no, this feels very tranquil. Honestly, I could have stayed there. It was very, very peaceful to me. But my friend Jazzy and I went there. We just were like, hey, let's do a little weekend trip. It's only about 4 hours away. So we went down there, went to all the shops. I got a palm reading. It was a lot of fun. And we stayed in the old hotel there on the property. And this hotel was built, I believe, in the 1930s. And they have gone in and added some things. Old hotels did not have bathrooms inside every single room. They had a sink, but if you needed to use the toilet or take a shower, there would be a bathroom at the end of the hallway usually. And they've gone back and they've added bathrooms. So every room has a sink in the room. And then where there used to be a closet, they have shoved a toilet and a tiny little shower in there. So both of us walk in and we're like, how? Like you have to kind of step over the toilet to get into the shower. It was very small. But it's still a gorgeous old hotel. And we had a great night. It was a full moon. We went out for a little walk. And at the end of the night, we went to bed. Well, I have short hair, and my friend also has short hair. And we were sharing the bed that night, and in the middle of the night, my friend said that she felt a brush across her cheek as if somebody's hair was flowing across her cheek. And it couldn't have been either of us. And so the next morning we woke up and I felt amazingly rested. I slept like a rock that night. And my friend was like, yeah, I feel rested too. Somebody definitely messed with me in the middle of the night though. And we had actually spoken to a ghost the night before. Not that we actually picked up on him, but there's a man who allegedly haunts that hotel. And before we went to bed, both of us were like, hey, dude, if you're in our room, please leave us alone. Like,
right.
We don't need to deal with that tonight. So both of us were guessing here. We don't know for sure. We think that it definitely wasn't him. We think that it was a female ghost who came in to just kind of check on us that night.
That's crazy.
That's so sweet. I love things like that, though, because it's like, you can tell that the ghost is genuinely, like, curious about people. Like, oh, hello. Like, how are you? You hear that a lot in hotels, especially. Did the place have, like, any kind of, like, history of being a hospital at some point?
No, it was built specifically to be a hotel, and Cassadaga is such a small community that it's just been continuously a hotel. It did catch on fire, I think, once, but what hotel hasn't?
Right. It's very true.
People are reckless in hotels.
Yeah, they just let loose. But, yeah, you hear it a lot, especially with hotels that have been hospitals previously, like the Marshall House specifically.
Sure.
A lot of people have experienced that, where they just like feel like a nice caress over their cheek or something, you know, or they feel like somebody's checking in on them, because a lot of times it's a nurse spirit, or, you know, somebody who has a more nurturing kind of energy to them. But honestly, with Cassadaga, I wouldn't be surprised that there's a bunch of spirits that are just attracted to the area, just because of how much energy all the people that live there put out, because it's got the most psychics in a small town, right?
I think it's the most psychics per capita in Florida.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Yeah. And so when you've got that in general, because psychics in general are kind of like a beacon of light to spirits. So, of course, like, I'm sure there's plenty of ghosts that aren't necessarily associated with the town, and they just kind of trickle on over because they're like, I want to be there. Like, that's nice. You know, I want to be with these people who like me and, like, are accepting. So I would love to go there sometime, and maybe we'll do it as, like, a Parajunkie exclusive or something. That would be really cool to go down there.
I mean, we are well within driving distance for a lot of nice, all throughout the Panhandle and Florida. We could get there with a road trip.
Right. So, Eenie, you said that you have a lot of ghost stories from the Panhandle of Florida. Do you have one in particular that you want to talk about?
Well, I got a few, but since we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, I'll tell y'all about my experience at the Coombs House Inn in Apalachicola, Florida. Ooh. So last year in 2 years ago, in August, I decided that I was going to treat my mom to a stay in Apalachicola. We're going to have a nice little relaxing weekend and see the sights. Apalachicola is a very small fishing community, essentially, in the Florida Panhandle. It's part of the Forgotten Coast. Mm-hmm. And it, at one point in time, was a port city similar to Savannah. But what kept Savannah thriving after the Civil War was the fact that we had a railroad. So after the Civil War, we had a railroad so that goods could get to and from the city a lot faster. Apalachicola did not have a railroad after the Civil War, so their port city just kind of fizzled, and it really became just a fishing community. But the Coombs House Inn started off as a private residence. It was a couple of other things, also caught on fire at some point when it was a private residence. But there are all these stories about it being haunted. And I actually used to work at a magazine in Port St. Joe, Florida, ages ago. And that place really intrigued me, and I had always wanted to stay there. So now I've got this opportunity, and we decided to go stay there. Now, it is still kind of set up like it was when it was a home, but like the dining room's been turned into a bedroom, and, you know, so there are bedrooms throughout the building, but there are also external porches that you either have an additional door that opens out onto it, or that is your main entrance into it. And a lot of these bedrooms can share these porches. So we check into our room, It's cute.
Excuse my loud thuds.
It was a quaint little room. I did get scared when I turned on the water to take a shower that night because I turned on the water and it came out red for a second. And I thought, oh my God, there's blood. And I'm done. We're just going to go stay at the Days Inn down the street. But then I realized it was just old pipes. So, but we went to bed and I woke up hearing a little boy's voice asking for candy. And
as
like
one does.
Yeah. And like I said, all these rooms share porches on the first and second floor. And so I thought there was a family staying in another room. They're sitting out on the porch enjoying the nice night. And one of the kids is asking for candy. Didn't think anything about it. Went back to sleep. I wake up a little while later and there's a little boy standing right next to me.
Oof.
And from the waist up, completely solid, from the waist down, transparent. And he's asking for candy. And I do not like to be woken up. So I looked at him and went, no, and just rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning I woke up and I realized, that he was talking to me. So my mom had actually brought some M&Ms. So I put some M&Ms out on the bedside table for him. And I was like, hey kid, if you're still around, this is for you. And I did not touch it the rest of the time that we were there. The second night that we were there, he did not wake me up.
He was like, thank you for my M&Ms. I don't need to disturb you anymore.
Right.
So
a constant lesson with ghosts, addressing them, giving them, some kind of acknowledgement at all, oftentimes will minimize their pushiness.
Right. I just love the reaction of no, go away.
We've talked about it before, too, that oftentimes when looking at something and questioning whether or not it's an apparition or not, if you just look down, oftentimes apparitions do not fully form. They do not go all the way to the floor. And some people believe it's because, the seat of the soul, the mind, or the heart is emanating its projection, and it doesn't want to waste energy on the whole thing. Why do you need the whole thing? You see my head, I'm here. So, that's one of those things. If you see something and you're questioning it, look at its feet. Take a little time to look at his feet.
That's so funny. I just hear see the comments in my head of being like, if that happened to me, I would be freaking out. I'd be leaving. And I'm like, this is what I mean when I say, like, sometimes you see ghosts and you're just kind of like, whatever,
Not me. I would have been gone.
Chris represents the scaredy cats of the group.
Absolutely.
So. But it's true. Not every ghost is like this horrifying experience. Sometimes it truly is just that simple interaction of, no, go away. Like, it's the middle of the night. You don't need candy. Go away. But, especially kid ghosts, they can be so persistent. We've talked about that until we're blue in the face. But, it's... we always talk about how kid ghosts can just be so rambunctious and irritating at times because they have no...
Just like kids.
Right. They have no concept of boundaries.
No.
So they're just like, I want candy.
I want candy. It's like... just imagine a kid coming up to you and just randomly saying that.
It sounds about right.
You'd be like, I don't have candy? Where are your parents?
Right.
Where are your feet?
Who needs feet in the afterlife?
That's right.
As
Seriously.
long as you got some M&Ms, you're good.
Yeah. See, Tampa doesn't really have like kid ghost stories like that. I don't know why. But it's just a bunch of buccaneers everywhere.
No, gotta love a good pirate ghost.
Swashbuckling men ghosts. That's
or
what...
some mobsters.
Mobsters too,
Mobsters.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is just the progression of pirate.
Yep. Right. I mean, Tampa in general, like, it's kind of the ghostiness stays in kind of the downtown Tampa region because Tampa's huge. Like, it is a very large town. So, when I'm talking about Tampa's ghosts in general, yes, there are ghosts in the surrounding area of downtown. Like where I lived over on the west end of Tampa. We had ghosts that were dating back to when the Native Americans were on that land. They are still there. We just built on top of them. So that was why we had that particular type of haunting. But the ones that get the most, notoriety, I should say, stick in that downtown region, and especially Ybor, because Tampa was a big port as well. Also, we have had lots of different crime come into the city. It's still kind of like that in a way, being right. Mm-hmm. We won't get into that, but yeah. So I feel like that's why that was mostly why we have those ghosts and things like that. We had a haunted theater, which was pretty cool.
Every theater's haunted.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's pretty cool. But Tampa doesn't really claim their ghosts.
Right.
Right.
Right. Absolutely.
There's like a book on Tampa's ghosts that one person wrote.
Probably not a Tampa local.
No, absolutely not.
Somebody in Middle Florida was like, "Hey, did you hear this?"
Did you hear
And
this?
that's the thing about a lot of Florida ghost books. You can find ghost books that are just about Savannah, but when it comes to Florida, they don't have ones that are just about Miami or just about Tampa.
The Ghosts of Florida.
Right. It's the Ghosts of Florida, or they might concentrate on an area like the Panhandle or Central Florida or South Florida.
Right. And I think that's just the culture of the state in general. They're just kind of like, ghosts. No. We had, they're like, we have all this other fun history. Look at St. Augustine. They're like the Spaniards coming in and conquistadors. That's what they like to talk about. They love the Buccaneers, though. Like pirate history, that's their jam. But they're like, don't talk about the ghosts, though.
People weren't, executed or murdered right in public squares here.
Right.
That's not going to give you a ghost, no.
Right.
In terrible ways too. The kinds of executions that they came up with in that 1600s, period is like, what if we put a bar behind somebody's head and we just like put a rope around their neck and just slowly tightened until their neck snapped? I'm like, that. Why?
Right.
Who was sitting there going, hey, I got a good idea. I know how to kill a person. It's like, that is a lot of engineering. Somebody put a lot of thought into that one. And B, why?
Right.
Is hanging not enough? Did we
No.
run out of rope?
And if you didn't know, Chris helped create the medieval torture museum.
Yes, in St. Augustine.
So that's why he knows a lot about these things. But if you're ever finding yourself in St. Augustine, obviously it's a very haunted town in general. But the museum is really interesting because it's true. There were so many ways to torture people, and a lot of them were done in Florida, but it's like medieval torture from around the world, and some of them are still being used today, which is fun, So maybe that's why we're a little bit haunted too. Now, Eenie, do you have any more Panhandle stories you would like to tell?
Yes. So this one, fair warning, is going to get a little dark.
Okay.
If the idea of child abuse is not your game, feel free to skip over the story.
Warning.
Right.
This is about the Dozier Boys School in Mariana. It was at one point in time called Hell's 14 Acres. It was established in 1900, did not close until 2011. After it had been open for only, I think, 2 or 3 years, stories of abuse started coming out after only 2 or 3 years. And it continued that way up until it closed. And people along the way would be like, hey, this is bad. Maybe stop doing this. And there would be like some rudimentary measures to try and curtail some of this. But then it would get, repealed. It was bad. Like it would get bad and then it would get okay again and then would get really bad again. And I will not go into detail about some of the things that happened here because it reads like a demon's resume. It was awful. But there's one building on this property called the White House. And if you Google the White House Boys, you can read your news articles about that because some of the survivors of this place are still alive.
Yeah.
And the things that they went through, whew, I was reading through it last night, and I'm just sitting in my bed sobbing because it was awful. And the White House is still on the property. They sealed it, and they use it as a memorial. It is sealed up. You cannot go into it, and by Florida law, it cannot be demolished. Now, the school itself is closed. The sheriff's office owns the property now, and their office is on the property. The fences that were around it have been taken down, and so you can drive onto the property. I do not recommend trying to go into any of the buildings, though, because a Category 5 hurricane came through a few years ago, and these are not structurally sound buildings. They look super creepy. Do not go into them. But I decided on a trip home that I was going to stop by there and pay my respects. And you drive onto this property, and everything is spread out, and you can't, there's no directions like White House this way. So I'm just driving in circles, and it is broad daylight. I see like some maintenance people out, so I didn't feel like I was alone or anything. And I circle around this old building, and before I see it, I get this pit in my stomach. And I look up, and there it is. And it is a small building. I can send you the picture of it so that your viewers can see it. And I was like, oh man, that's it. Because I used to work in broadcast in Florida, especially when a lot of these stories were coming out, because survivors were coming forward and saying, hey, there are more children who died on this property than you think died on this property. And there's a burial ground there with about 31 crosses on it. But the survivors were saying there are more kids buried on this property. And since then, when all this stuff started coming out, they've gone through and done ground penetrating radar, and they've found, I think they've identified between 55 and 70 graves on the property now. But I get on my car to walk up. I took a picture of it, and as I'm standing there in front of this building, I feel this wave of fear come over me. And I felt very anxious, and I start looking around, and suddenly I'm afraid that someone's going to come up to me. And I'm thinking, this is weird, because there's no reason for me to be afraid. And then I realized it wasn't me. It was some of the spirits of the boys there who were warning me away, because in their head, they're still replaying all of that. So they didn't want me there. And I left, and I cried for 45 minutes afterwards. I'm driving back to Savannah just sobbing, because you can still feel them there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that's just such a sad case scenario for those kids, because it's even worse. There's times where you're like, I really wish that there weren't ghosts there.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's almost worse that they're stuck there in a way. And now that's not to say that spirits, from what we can tell, it's some spirits choose to stay places, even if it was like a really horrible situation for them. They choose to stay there almost as like guardians of a sort.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Or, but it's not always, because I know people will be like, oh, well, why don't we try to like help them cross over? There's a multitude of reasons why spirits stay. So you really can't assist in that way a lot of
even
times.
Just the emotional output can be, you're sensing an emotion, like the entire location becomes the emotion, and that is, and I don't know that we've talked about it, but that is a type of supernatural haunting where you're not dealing with intelligence, kind of like a residual, but it's even more about how a place can resonate with the focal energy of so many people. It's not the residual of a person or an event. It is an overwhelming sensation. We talked about this off camera, or not in the podcast, going to like a concentration camp. I went to Dachau when I was young, and the sensation of just knowing the weight, like the air changes, the sensation changes. Birds aren't singing. You have this notion that you're standing in a place that has become hallowed by an emotional output, and it's not necessarily one spirit or a group of spirits. Not to say that they're not there. It's just that sensation, that wave of emotion that comes over you is oftentimes so much ingrained in every bit of sand and wood and everything of a location. So yeah, it's difficult when you find a place of immense suffering to withstand it.
I had a friend who worked there very briefly. It would have been around 2001, I think. And I don't remember what his job.
It was an operation.
Yeah. It was still a juvenile detention facility, and he was patrolling some buildings at night. I don't remember what his actual job was, but he walked into this building that he knew no one was supposed to be in, and he heard a little boy asking for water, and the little boy was behind a locked door, and he knew no one was supposed to be in there. He tried the door; it was locked. So he goes back to find a coworker saying, hey, there's this kid stuck in a room in this building. And so the guy came back with him. They unlocked the door, and there was no one in there. And it was one of those rooms that does not lock from the inside. It locks from the exterior. So there's no way that a kid could have snuck out of a dorm and tried to prank somebody. And he said that was a really unsettling moment for him.
Absolutely. Oof,
sure.
Geez.
Yeah. That whole situation is just so unfortunate, and you can only imagine how traumatic of a place that could have been to grow up, and how much energy was output just from the people the children who lived there,
Right.
Kids as young as 5 were sent there.
Lord.
It's just horrendous. It really is. On a different side of the coin, though, with places that put out a lot of energetic kind of emotions and things like that, Florida is also home to where they have executed a lot of serial killers, including Ted Bundy. That would happen in Stark, Florida, and that's still where they do all the executions for the state of Florida. In Stark in general, when you drive through that town, it's kind of one of those towns that they only have a couple stoplights, but they have a million police officers that are waiting to pull you over for going even one over the speed limit, that type of town. But there's always this darkness to Stark in a way, and I think it's because they bring so many evil people.
Sure.
Because think about it, Ted Bundy was there, I'm trying to think of all the other people who were executed, but things like that already, just having a facility like that harbors a lot of people who have just really dark energy to them in general, I think it's affected the town. But even events when they executed Ted Bundy, so many people came to that execution, and I feel like there's still kind of an impression of it. Sure. In the town, because especially since he killed some girls, he sexually assaulted and killed some girls over at Florida State, and a lot of Florida State men came to Ted Bundy's execution, and they it was a rampage of just people who were really excited for this man to be executed, and that's a lot to put on a place. It's going to change a place, truly. Sure. And I feel like that's why, people don't like driving through Stark, and a lot of people don't live in Stark,
Even the name, Stark.
Right.
This is a Stark place.
They built a bypass so you don't have to go through Stark anymore. I'm not kidding. You don't want to be there. It's just, and I'm sorry if any of you are from Stark, but, it's just true. It's a place that people don't really talk about, the vibe of it. I don't know of any. I haven't spent much time there. I've driven through it 10,000 times, but, it's a place that they don't really talk about any ghosts that come from it. But I'm there have to be.
Oh, sure.
When you have that type of prison.
But, the idea of avoiding ghost stories in a place like that is probably,
right.
A part of a mechanism of coping with the darkness of the, don't entertain them. Don't feed the ghosts.
Exactly. So Florida's got a dark history that it just doesn't talk about enough.
We should probably, switch gears and say that Disney World is right there and is haunted. And what's interesting about Disney World's hauntings is people have ritualized going to Disney World in their lives. There are people who go every season, who go, once a year, whose family fondest memories are happening there. So Disney World is a lightning rod for good feelings of childhood, of the good times, and so it's interesting to think that you could possibly have a place, in opposition to Stark, where so many good memories are forging a sanctuary for spirits. Because in the case of Disney World, you might get a lot of ghosts that are not, they didn't die on property. They didn't, have some tragedy happen to them. I know that I've heard countless stories of people trying to sneak ashes.
They have a special code at Disney World,
right,
for when employees spot somebody dumping ashes.
Right. And so there have to be a few successful dumpings that had happened in the past.
There are actually. The most famous one is Haunted Mansion, which is my favorite ride at Disney. I was a Disney kid. I am also a Disney adult. So, basically the Haunted Mansion, it was like this child's like favorite ride in all the world. So his mom did that. She snuck his ashes, dumped it on the ride because they said that she couldn't do it because she asked, but they said no. So she was like, I'm going to do it anyways. And so there have been photos captured of the little boy sitting in the doom buggies.
And classic ghost hitchhiker.
I love that.
Yeah, and so he's sitting in the doom buggies, and like you can look it up. There's plenty of photos of him, but I've seen the boy myself because, like I said, I grew up going to Disney, living in Tampa. It's an easy. You can go for the day and then drive home that night. So. I've seen the kid on the side. I saw him there's a portion of the ride where you go through the cemetery, and he was just standing in the cemetery. And I was like, wow, that's, ironic, but it's.
Well, I think if you really wanted to, you could probably commission an urn to be made like the decorations.
Right.
And just like bring it on and just drop it off and walk away.
Right.
Write a funny little caption on it.
Absolutely. And so, Disney is very haunted in that way, though. But yes, the Haunted Mansion one, I can confirm he is real. He is there. And a lot of employees have also confirmed that he is real. So we'll leave you with that happy thought of the Haunted Mansion and the little boy ghost. But Eenie, thank you so much for joining us for all these episodes and things like that.
You'll have me back.
Yes. Yeah. You'll be getting lots of Eenie content for a little bit. So this has been great, though. And if you guys have any other states that you want us to talk about or research or things like that, or if you live in like a place that we're not familiar with their ghost stories, like Montana or something,
send them in.
Send them in. Tell us why your state's haunted.
Ghostmail.
Yes. Send it to ghostmail@hauntedcitypodcast.com. Even if it's not like a state-related sort of ghost story, if you have a ghost story, please send it over to us because we do a segment called Ghost Mail, and we will read it and we will react to it. So with that, definitely follow Eenie on social media under Salt Waves, Spanish Moss, and also make sure to follow us at Haunted City Podcast on all the social media platforms. But with that, my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And stay spooky, y'all.